welcome everyone. My name is Lorena Axinte. I work as a future mobility consultant at Bax Company. We are one of the partners in the ULaaDS project, which is a Horizon 2020 project, which aims to foster sustainable and livable cities by deploying innovative shared zero-emission logistics as a response to the on-demand economy. So we have 3 lighthouse cities, and I think all of them are represented here today, Bremen, Groningen, and Mechelen. And we also have 4 satellite cities, and I think I see someone from a few of them, Alba Iulia, Bergen, Edinburgh, and Rome. We're soon starting the replication process and activities, so the interactions between these cities will start increasing. And just a bit of context for today's webinar, in the work package where we're looking at policies and sustainable urban logistics plans, we have started doing internal knowledge sessions, and this was going to be a small meeting for the ULaaDS partners, but we realized that the topic that we were going to address is quite important and there's a need to have more dialogues. So we opened up the webinar, and as I was mentioning, the response has been quite surprising, which is why I will keep this introduction short. And just to mention that we've split today's session in 2 bits. The first one will be an overview of SULPs across Europe, given by Katie and Suzanne from Rupert Consult. We'll have a short discussion after, and then we'll give the word to Paul Fenton from Stockholm, who will give us some insights on sustainable urban logistics there. And I will shortly introduce you our first 2 speakers. Suzanne Böller is leading the integrated planning team at Rupert Consult. She has a PhD in engineering in urban planning and has worked on numerous international and European projects, specializing in impact analysis and evaluation of transport policies and measures. And she's here together with Katie Waya, who is a city planner currently working in the integrated planning team in projects related to sustainable mobility. Katie has a master in transport and city planning from UCL, and she has worked in some really amazing places like Addis Ababa and Lima, among others. I see Tim had raised his hand, but not anymore. So if it's not urgent, I will just give the word to Katie and Suzanne. And for any questions before they finish their presentations, please use the chat, and then we'll open up the discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen. Let me know if you can see the
We can see it well.
Nice. Okay, yeah, so thank you, Lorena, for the introduction. And actually, yes, this opportunity to talk about urban logistics and the status and experience in Europe is quite interesting. And we are also happy to be part of the discussion. So yeah, as Lorena said, we are going to give a it's not, of course, very comprehensive, because also we don't have so much time to maybe go in deep on so many topics, but we will try to give a brief status of urban logistics in Europe. So the content that we are going to address is basically urban logistics first as a challenge and a policy field. Then we are going to see the status of SULP development, and also finally some conclusions of why SULP is important and what are the challenges that we should address for the future. So firstly, we are going to set the scene. No, what are we talking about when we start speaking about urban freight, or when we work in this field as well? No, so as we know, city logistics is not isolated. it's very well connected to all the other systems in a city and has these significant connections with other sectors too. So it's fundamental for the economies of cities. No? Why? Because it provides the delivery services to satisfy the needs of customers, society, industry, business, etc. So we also have seen that in the last decades, e-commerce has drastically increased. No? Why? Because of the convenience it offers. We can easily order anything from our house, and we have the product on the next day, no, without even the need of going out, no. So these have generated an increase in the demand for last mile delivery, but at the same time, this also has generated more traffic congestion, air pollution, noise. So, for instance, 6% of the total CO2 emissions is generated by freight transport in Europe, and worldwide is a little more, so 8%. So this means that we really need to decarbonize freight transports if we want to achieve the climate goals that we have. So this is a huge challenge, as we can see, because for the future, the demand for deliveries and for freight is only seen to be increased. So how do we achieve, how do we achieve these goals? So in this situation, we can also see that urban freight is often not given the necessary priority it has to have together with other systems. No? So for example, in urban planning, normally freight is sometimes not considered or even considered at a limited extent. No? So this is also adding to the challenge. How do we start addressing these big issues, and how do we make it better if we are not considering it enough in the planning? And at the same time, we also know that freight distribution has uses a great percentage of space in the cities, and is also central for accessibility and providing quality of life also in our cities. No? So these are some of the situation where we stand in terms of logistics. So as we mentioned, there was never a time where the demand for last mile delivery was bigger than now. So there is an increase, as you can see in the image, there is an increase in urbanization rates in cities, also more customers, more products to deliver every time. And so all of this is generating at least a growth by 80% by 2030. So all of this really give us, the challenge ahead of us. How are we going to deal with all these demands? No? So in response to all these increasing demands, what do the private companies do? They invest regularly in new technologies, innovative solutions, and so on, to try to provide better services and respond to this demand. But also the other thing is that together with all these new innovations, new challenges arise in environmental, social, economic aspects. No? So also aiming to reduce the emissions or the negative effects that urban freight is generating, there is now an increasing need for using, for example, alternative methods for green delivery. So new solutions like, for example, cargo bikes, which are now being used more than before, and crowd shipping, among others, are like these alternative technologies that can respond better to the needs while reducing the negative effects, right? The other also interesting aspect to consider is the conflicting interests. So we know that in the urban freight sector, there are many stakeholders that play an important role. Among them are the private companies, which includes shipping, logistics operators, and also the companies that distributes, all these products. Also, we have public organizations, NGOs, and the general public too. So these many stakeholders have in the end conflicting interests, which is also in a way blocking, this improvement in the sector. So this is what we have. This is now where we stand in the sector. And what then the European Commission says? What is the direction towards urban logistics? So the new EU urban mobility framework that was released last year considers SULP as a key element to achieve the EU Commission goals. So for example, this includes 3 main elements that we try to summarize in here. As you can see, first is a reinforced approach to sustainable urban mobility plans and mobility management plans, as well to 10T urban nodes, and also zero emission city-free vehicles and last mile delivery services. So what does it include? The Commission will give recommendation to countries, to EU countries, to support regions and cities in the development of SUMPs, which includes, for example, an upgraded SUMP concept, clear priorities for promoting more sustainable solutions, also the integration of resilience, and the development of SULPs, based on zero emission vehicles and solutions. On the second part related to zero emission city freight logistics, this will include, for example, a revised CO2 emission performance standards, and also ensure the integration between SULPs with SUMPs. So this is also, I think, one of the aims of the project that we are working on, ULaaDS. Together with this, the Commission also wants to support the dialogue, more collaboration, as we have seen, the many stakeholders need better frameworks for collaboration and coordination. So this is also something the Commission wants to support, and networking among all these stakeholders, and also data sharing, so that the sector can respond better to the needs. And also on the last part, reinforcing the approach to 10T urban nodes. Here, for example, it will be needed, the development of multimodal freight terminals, and also ensuring that the logistics, the sustainable urban logistics in all member states. These are some of the key elements that the Commission wants to achieve in terms of urban logistics. So now I will give the word to my colleague Susanne, who will give us an overview on the status of SULP in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Kati, for this overview. And in the last few minutes, I would actually like to explain a little bit and refer to what Kati has mentioned, especially what is the status of SULP, but also what is the status of the of looking at the functional urban area and the logistic planning area. And I would like to draw your attention on some key facts of a study which we have carried out last year. It was a fact-finding studies in 27 member states, and we have undertook analysis of different planning documents in over 100 cities. And I would like to give you some information about, so for example, how many cities do have an SULP? And what we see is that 20% of the cities we have worked with have a planning approach on urban logistics. So they have, and 13% have developed a specific urban logistic plan. So only a minor amount of cities have such a plan, although there is a high awareness of the logistics sector and also of the necessity to take actions. Go to the next slide, please. And here with this overview, I would like to draw your attention to the analysis which we have carried out about how many cities actually are considering the connectivity of the urban area with the TEN-T network. Because I think this question is very important when it comes to logistics, because there's a very close interconnection between long distance transport where freight and goods are delivered and the urban logistic. So this needs a special attention. And what we see is that very few cities are considering this connectivity, and only 31% consider the full extent of the connectivity between urban area and the wider functional urban area. So there is something that was an overall result, that especially the integration of the integration of the functional urban area in the SUMP development and SUMP development is quite problematic. Another point, I think maybe also related to the functional urban area, is the point of data collection. So, and what we found out is that only a third collects data on urban logistics. Maybe come to the next slide, please. So to sum up the challenges and the gaps when it comes to urban logistics planning. So logistic measures which are included in mobility plans in the SULP are usually small actions, and they are smaller than they are very often only a smaller part of a bigger plan. They are mostly research pilots or demonstration projects. So they are using less strategic approaches. So what we see in a nutshell is that the development of an urban logistic plan is quite challenging for a city. There's a difficulty in the collection of data on urban logistic activities. And also there is a lack of involvement of politicians and ministries in the policies and program regarding SUMP, and especially the financial and also the technical support is lacking. So therefore we came up with some recommendations. Next slide, please. Where we see a special need for further support, and for example, to support awareness raising on impact of logistics on SUMP objectives, but also that the access to funding, which needs to be improved, so that maybe SULP could also be a prerequisite for funding or access to cohesion funds and CEF funding. But we also see that there also maybe smaller cities need specific support for their SULP and logistic planning. But also it's still an issue, what I have already mentioned, is the support of cities and national organization for better integration into the TEN-T. So this is a list of 7 recommendations for the improvement of logistics planning. And I only have highlighted a few points. Coming to the final conclusions. So what why do we think are SULPs important? And we have clearly stated that there is a need for better planning, and that we have really an increase in traffic performance in the logistics sector. So there are major challenges. So there's a lack of focus and strategy on urban logistics, and the lack of coordination among the actors, private sector, public sector. There's the lack of data and also information. This sector is very much business driven. So there are innovations and also technical developments taking place, which are very relevant for the cities, but planning needs to keep up with this pace of innovation development. And we need a better goal setting and a better cooperation in this sector. We need a city-led and object-driven process. And I think that SULP could help with that, to have a city and objective-driven process, which needs to address the overall objectives of an SUMP, which is accessibility, quality of life, environment, also safety. So, and therefore we need a better dialogue. We need between the different actors, academia, but also the industry, startups, and the cities, and a participatory discussion, where to go, what kind of measures are needed, and also how these demonstration projects, pilots, should be set up, and how should they be monitored and evaluated. And I think that ULaaDS exactly goes into this direction, to bring the planning sector and also this innovation and demonstration opportunities together. That was our introduction, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Suzanne and Katie, for the overview. I think this was very useful, and we already have a question in the chat, but maybe from my side, just to know if the study that you mentioned is publicly available, or if not, if we can make this presentation available.
Yes, it's not yet available publicly.
Okay, will it be available?
Not yet. It was announced, but it's not clear when exactly.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I think we can open up to questions for the next 6 minutes or so. And since we already have a question from Pedro, maybe Katie, you can respond to expanding a bit on why there is a conflicting interest between stakeholders and especially between players.
Oh, thank you, Lorena. So, well, about the conflicting interests. For example, the problem in this case is that, as we know, the urban logistics have some impacts, right? Like for example, in the environmental side, like causing more air pollution, noise, and also traffic congestion and so on. So for example, in some cities, maybe they would want to restrict, for example, the areas where freight vehicles can go, or, this will lead to restrictions, in some cases with the aim to trying to improve how the system can affect less to the cities, But this, in turn, these restrictions might lead to increasing, for example, increasing prices for the suppliers, for the supplies, for products. And this might lead also to, this might reach to the customers in the end, So we know that all these different actors that, for example, the customers, in this case, us, the society who receive the products and so on, we will be affected in the end. And this is all, for example, the suppliers, they also have their own, interests to, of course, have the business, and also the public sector, they want just to improve, try to minimize the impacts and so on. So sometimes these interests are not aligned, and it's difficult to get to an agreement, what is the best solution to solve this problem, to make it better, to have less impact, and sometimes it's very difficult to reach this agreement, and also the solutions might not make happy to everyone, So in this part is very key, the collaboration. As Susanne mentioned, more cooperation, more collaboration in all sides would help to have maybe an aligned vision for logistics for the future, So that goes in that direction.
Great, thank you. We have quite a few questions in the chat, so I think we can take a couple more, and then for the rest, Susanne and Katie, you can either reply in the chat or we can leave them towards the end. So in the order that they arrived, we'll just go with words. The first one was, do you have identified specific reasons why there is a disconnect between last mile logistics planning versus the 10T nodes? And maybe to this, I could add that it's surprising, at least to me, that in the mobility framework, we have seen that SUMPs have become mandatory for all the major nodes, and for SULPs, there's just a recommendation. So maybe you could comment on why we see that SULPs are still not something, let's say, imposed to cities, but rather recommended.
I think it's a big step forward, so that that especially these important mobility centers needs to come up with an SUMP, and a lot of city at least not only focus on passenger transport, but also logistic is part of the SUMP. So I see this like still as an integrated part of SUMP development. But I do agree that, especially for when it comes to urban nodes, because for me, urban nodes, you always look on the interconnection of long distance and urban logistic. And I think this needs specific attention, because also and you need to look actually on the whole value chain, on the whole chain. So you need to, so that especially for this topic, I think this has a very clear very clear logistic focus. But anyway, I think I see still the opportunity that in the SUMP sector or in the SUMP planning, this will be integrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I know that there are many more questions, so please try to answer them in the chat. We'll go on with our in the end. We'll still keep 10-15 minutes for more discussion. So after this introduction from Rupert Consult, we have Paul Fenton, who is a project manager at the Environment and Health Administration of Stockholm. And he's working mainly on international innovation projects for sustainable mobility and transport. I'm going to share my screen for Paul's presentation, and I hope you can see it now. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. This is great. I'm just going to say something about the last point, because I think it's a really interesting question. And one factor I think that plays a role is that the national agencies responsible for national infrastructure haven't actually taken into account the content of SUMPs. And something that I think is a bit of a concern in the current proposal is that there's an obligation now proposed that they should promote exchange between cities, but there's not an obligation for them to vertically integrate the outputs of that into the national plans. And I think that's something really, really important if we're to get the integration across the network. But anyway, that's a different issue. It's a more complicated issue than maybe the one I'll talk about now, which is what we've done in Stockholm, how we've approached, excuse me, the issue of a SULP. So the overall objective for our transport department is on the screen, and that's supposed to be realized through our overall sustainable mobility policy. Within that, We have, sorry, now, excuse me. I'm just trying to find something there so I can see better. There, now. We can go to the next slide, sorry. Within that, we have then our freight plan. So we have different plans for different thematic areas underneath the overall umbrella of our SULP. This freight plan has these three general objectives, which I think we all share and were issues that are fairly self-evident. And then this is to be realized through different approaches to improve our use of the boxes underneath regulation, the instrument, strategic land use, and so on. If we go to the next slide, what does this actually mean? This means we focus on 6 general approaches to addressing urban freight challenges in the city. The first one is the overall problem of coordination, and that's both a intra-local coordination problem, where we have our challenges both within our city administration, how we approach the issue of goods transport, but also the broader challenges, the interlocal and the like I said, the vertical, the multi-level challenges of how you link our local work and the work of the companies and actors in the city to the wider challenges across the network. Then we have off-peak transport, which means more than just night, but I'll talk about that in a second. With geofencing, we have consolidation. In this case, it's called Älskade stad. This is a concept which I'll talk about. And we have waterways, and we have e-commerce. I'll take the next slide. I mentioned coordination now. There are different fora for this. We have an internal city network for exchange around freight and logistics issues. That's partly in relation to planning, it's partly in relation to climate or environment or other topics. So that's where we gather our experts from different parts of the city organization. We're a very big organization with about 40,000 employees within the administration and then the city companies. So this involves, for issues like procurement, it's quite complicated to get the organization moving in the same way. So it's quite important to have an internal network. And then we have different networks involving external actors, and external actors can mean both companies, but it can also mean academia, it can mean national agencies or vehicle manufacturers or others. These networks are really, really important for us. We talk constantly with the different stakeholders to try and get a feeling for what's working and not working. During the past year, we've been doing this in a little bit more systematic way through a project called Hello, which is an EIT Urban Mobility project. And there we've been talking a lot with different stakeholders about the content of this strategy and what's worked and not worked and where we can improve it and see how we can move forward. If we go to the next one. Off-peak hours, we can go to the next slide again. Off-peak hours, then, we've worked to try and take a little bit off the peaks here and shift it to other hours. You can see that we have nighttime restrictions, so we've worked with a lot of focus on how to open up those restrictions to silent vehicles and zero-emission vehicles. But we're also trying to encourage shifts to the hours that are in the middle of the day to see if people can deliver at better times. And there it's important to talk with stakeholders. So we've identified groups such as restaurants, where deliveries typically take place early in the morning. You have to staff that. It costs a lot of money to staff restaurants or other premises to take goods at a time when you don't have customers, and maybe that's undesirable. some restaurants, bars, other shops would like deliveries to come at different times of the day. So there's an issue there of like trying to find creative ways to spread out the demand for deliveries in a way that suits all the actors involved. It's always easier if no one's losing money. They like that. And we go to the next slide. Sorry, and there's a ring there, and there's a vehicle that one of the vehicles we can go forward with the slides. There's a vehicle that we've been testing, which is a plug-in hybrid. There are some more. If we go to the next slide, yep. Oh, this is the same vehicle. This was in the Eccentric project. Geofencing. I'm going to, after I finish, I'll post a link about geofencing because that's interesting to see, even if some of the text and speakers are speaking Swedish. We have tested both in the vehicle on the previous slide, geofencing. We have had an environmental zone for the best part of 27 years, I think, in Stockholm, and we are increasingly looking at how we can apply low emission zones in different, or advanced low emission zones in different areas. Geofencing is one way we can do that. We've looked at that with control of speed at night time, and now we're testing it throughout the day with a consortium of actors. If we go to the next one. And as I mentioned, this is a Consolidation Center involving a collaboration between a property owner, a packet delivery company, and a waste recycling company who take out fractions of waste at the same time as the packages are delivered in. This works really well and is spread to other cities in Scandinavia. We are looking at ways to expand this. They've expanded several times, but there's challenges in terms of access to physical infrastructure, because you need terminals which have different kinds of specifications. There aren't so many buildings we have that meet them. There's always a conflict when we're trying to think about creative ways to do new logistics, to apply new logistic solutions, that there's always a battle for space, for public space, which I know you're all familiar with, and it makes it a major challenge when trying to advocate the case for smarter logistics solutions in the city. If we go to the next slide. This is a map showing the area of the city where Älvskyddestad operates. And at the lower end of the map, there's a street called Södermälarstrand, and that's a yellow line on the bottom of the map. And at that location, during the past year, we've been trying to start a new micro terminal for refrigerated goods, which is another kind of challenge in our last mile puzzle. This is a test we've been running now for a few months using light electric vehicles for last mile delivery of food parcels and other kinds of refrigerated goods. Excuse me. And that's working really well. We're getting very interesting results from that. So that we, at a later date, will be able to say something interesting about that. If we go on, our next puzzle bit in Stockholm is Waterways. And you can see all these different things have completely different stakeholders, so you have to talk with everybody all the time. We have a lot of water. We have both our seaports on the coast, and we have inland waterways. We have also in our city-owned port company, we have control over all of the quays in the inner city. So for this issue, we have to think about issues like co-transporting, the possibility to co-transport people and products or out to the islands in the archipelago, or to address other kinds of delivery battles related to the different parts of the city. We see now with the very dramatic increases in diesel prices that there are lots of loud voices coming from our island communities complaining about the cost of moving things around now. So this is a really fascinating challenge for us as a city. One thing we've worked on, if we go to the next slide, is consolidation of aggregates from subway extension projects and also from other construction projects. We have some sites in the city where we're doing that. We also work with, excuse me, recycling. We're trying to take recycling and other materials from parts of the city that are hard to access by truck, but where there's a high population density. So those are two projects we're working on at the moment. We go forward to the next one, which is, I think, the last one. This is of course, the biggest challenge. The truck on the right is the one we're testing for refrigerated deliveries. The other issue of delivery boxes or parcel boxes is a really, really complicated topic. We go straight into the many discussions on how to use urban space. Where should these be? How should they be operated? Which kind of platform should they have? Should they be one company's proprietary solution, or should they be open to lots? Should they be on public space or private space, indoor, outdoor? All of these things are really, really complicated. We are at the moment gathering data from various different actors and trying to figure out how we as a city should plan for this in the future, because we know we need these solutions, but we don't necessarily know how or where, how they should be operated, by who, what our role in that is, and in some cases, whether it's desirable. If you've got empty shops, they could be filled by parcel boxes instead of having parcel boxes outside. So these are some of the challenges we're working with. All of this is generally captured by the vague overall themes in our SULP, and I think that's a good lesson, that you can frame a SULP to be very specific, or you can try to make it more about orientation. And we are at a stage now where maybe we should be more specific. I'm not sure, because we have to revise our SULP soon. Our SULP predates the EU guidelines, so we have to also consider what we think is relevant to address that. But that's how far it's got us so far. So thank you.
This was great. Thank you so much, Paul. I think you've covered quite a few important aspects, and what was striking to me was that image with all the stakeholders that you have identified, which I think explains why it becomes so challenging to engage with everyone and find solutions that work for most of them. I think there were a few questions previously that might also be nice to respond to from your side. For instance, there was a question from Günther on the different types of logistics, so the different forms of logistics, which I think you already nicely showed, that when Stockholm tries to tackle challenges in logistics, it's not just looking at freight, but it's also looking at perishable goods and also waste and so on. And the second one was the fact that cities often ask how much time is needed to make a SULP, and if there is a shortcut version, maybe for smaller cities or cities that are out of time. So how much time did it take in Stockholm's case, and how much time do you think it will take to update the previous version?
Yeah, sorry, my throat's really dry. It's terrible. I can't actually answer the first question because the overall strategy was produced by our traffic department, and it was produced over I think they had a fairly long process with a lot of dialogue when they were trying to frame it. It's worked very well, I think, as a general kind of structure guiding us. There were specific things pointed out, like geofencing, which is of course like a specific technological approach. But in general, it's been quite high level of more of an orientation document rather than a specific way forward. And I think that speeds up the process, of course, because once you start specifying the measures, then you really are coming into a lot of the conflicts, and the conflicts can be overcome or may not even exist. Some issues are challenging because nobody realizes they exist or that there's potential. So if we take the example of the Consolidation Center as there, the matchmaking of property recycling and parcel delivery, which emerged there, has been very successful. But if you change one or two rules, that the business model for that can break. There's no subsidy for that. That's a completely business-led initiative. For a different sector or segment, it might not work. So that you have to have a constant dialogue with people to try and figure out where can things work and not, and how then can we change rules to make them work if the city is responsible for the rules, of course. Or if we have some leverage somewhere to influence someone else. So that kind of thing is quite tricky. So I think it's good to think ambitions and general fields of action, and then to maybe specify in the next step of actually implementing.
Yeah, I wonder what Word thinks about this, especially in the context of his work, which he's doing for ULaaDS, this idea of having a rather loose vision for logistics and then specifying when time comes. Does that make SULPs better, Word?
Ooh, good question. Well, I would say loose does not necessarily mean leaving open all opportunities, but when it comes to with regards to the principles, so a vision based on a set of principles that you would like to adhere to, that should be very clear, I think, giving also directions to the other stakeholders that are involved. But as Paul is already expressing, I think when it comes to the operationalization, it's not only the complexity of the stakeholders that are involved, but also the environment in which you're operating, new technology that becomes available, or a lack of political support or whatever, that requires you to adapt. So I think there in the operationalization, we need the capacity for adaptation indeed.
Okay. You also had a question about any specific capacities that a policymaker might need to be successful in guiding the transition towards more sustainable last mile logistics. So I think this is a good question both for Paul and for Katie and Suzanne, who have worked a lot with policymakers and practitioners. What do you think, Paul?
I think this is a really difficult one because on what I think there are different levels. We commissioned a report a few years ago to look at consolidation as whether it would be possible to consolidate municipally procured goods in Stockholm, and got that down to a level of how many individuals should be employed and what competencies they need, how much will it cost, and those things aren't realistic for our administration to deal with, and that's just for our part of the puzzle. So it is very challenging because we always need expertise from people who know the sector and the branch and how it works, and on the other hand, that has to be balanced with the other kind of expertise, which maybe is more this visionary, strategic, or not political, but you know, how to work the system knowledge. To make sure that things are presented in a way that means that they're acceptable. Because again, depending on how you formulate the vision, you get led in a different direction. If the vision is very clear and says zero emission or something else, then it's quite easy to work maybe towards it. But if it's just general, efficient and attractive, it might be more challenging. Yeah, I think there are specific capacities, but I don't exactly know how to put a finger on what they are. I think a mix is good. The more people and the more knowledge, the better. The more, obviously, you need some kind of good approach for sorting the information that you get as well. A method for sorting and structuring the information. And what I found, at least, is when I have worked with this topic, our general overview and structure approach has actually worked quite well to then try and fish out the specific issues, because it's quite general and quite broad, and so then you can break it down into more specific data. I noticed there's a question about data sharing from Pedro also, and I just want to say that we're working on this issue of how to align our interests with others in the city to get access to new kinds of data, because we have a basic awareness of how many vehicle movements and things happen for logistics, but we don't really know the details, and the details are where the planning issues arise. So we're working with different actors with different roles in the process, all of whom have data, to test what we can get from them voluntarily, and then also what we can get from them for payment if we need to, or if we can find ways to demand the data. And to go back to the discussion on the overall regulation, it's voluntary in the regulation. We've requested that it be a little bit harder than that, because we think if you're entering a city, there shouldn't really be a problem with sharing certain kinds of data. It's not necessarily, we don't need to know how much the margins are, but we need to know where things happen.
Okay, great. And maybe you can also address the last question from Bart about the ambition to make the city logistics zero emission by a certain year, whether this exists or not in Stockholm.
This is a question where the sand is always shifting, because what we've got an overall ambition to be carbon positive by 2040, so we should be emission free. The politicians have been increasingly ambitious, I would say, in their statements. So there's a vision for zero emission in a city, which I think is for 2030. I might be saying the wrong thing now, because it's something that has been included in recent statements and in our budget, but it's not totally aligned with some of the pre-existing strategies. So the 2030 is for the inner city a near-term objective, and 2040 is for the whole of our municipal area, but that's not the functional area. And that all, goes back to this earlier discussion of how complicated it is. But that's what we're aiming for. We want to move very quickly, and that's obviously really, really hard.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, No, I just wanted to maybe add a little bit on the question about the capacities needed in local authorities. I think this is very, very critical because, yeah, I mean, one of the reasons also, as we mentioned, is that innovations, you know, go or they progress so quickly, like not only in urban logistics, but in the whole transport sector as well, you know? So it's very difficult to keep up with this pace, actually. So not only for local authorities, but decision makers, you know, and like at different levels. So of course, like sometimes they have to deal with all these new innovations, and it's really difficult to respond, right? Like as much quickly as is needed, like the decision should be made. And so I think this sometimes also delays a lot the processes, decision-making processes in governments. And I think for that, of course, like when support is needed, I think governments should get support, like external support if needed, because also human resources are limited. And in some other cases, also budget is limited. No? So all this also makes it much more complicated to quickly implement solutions that could be desirable, but in the end, not really feasible.
Yeah, indeed. And maybe just to add another question, which is quite related to what we've been discussing. It comes from Matteo, who's asking, what would be the key differences in the process of developing and adopting a SULP compared to a SUMP? Besides maybe the different stakeholders to engage with.
Well, I think like we are currently in the process where our revised SUMP is in one of the final consultation stages. I think it's supposed to be approved anyway this year, and my impression of the process has been that we've really done an internal job. It's not really a SUMP in the true sense in terms of reaching out and discussing with lots of stakeholders. It's based on lots of other processes where that work has been done. And of course, the SUMP is addressing the broader strategic challenge for the city. So we've tried to separate the SUMP process from the action plans for the different areas where we really specify the different tasks. But for logistics, that's really hard because so many of the measures depend on issues related to the vision. That it's a little bit difficult to specify, I think. So even if the stakeholders are different, the vision should be the same. The vision should be about what's good for the city and where the city is going and how it should be improved. And then from that, you can be more, you can go break it down more into these general themes of what is it we should be working with. But when you go into the detail, you come directly often into conflict with the vision. Or with other use, you know, like delivery boxes. Should they be on the street? Should there be a mobility hub there? Should there be a parking space there? Should there be a loading bay? Should there be a park? Should there be a shop? Well, like how do we use space? Those kinds of issues don't get resolved by being like too precise in the actual development of the document, I think.
Yeah,
it has to come in a more implementation.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. I'm aware of the time. I know it's been a bit more than 1 hour, so I would like to thank you all for being here today. I know there's still a lot of questions that were not answered in the chat. So my suggestion would be to move this discussion either on our social media channels or by email. It might be that we will organize another webinar soon. And until then, I would like to give the word to Ariana from EUROCITIES, who will tell you a bit more about the replication process.
Yes, just thanks, Lorena, and thanks to all the presentation and engagement in the chat. I just wanted to mention that we are currently recruiting 2 follower cities for ULaaDS. Becoming a follower city would mean that you would be able to officially become a part of our community of practice and be involved in the future ULaaDS activity, including a study visit that we are organizing in one of our lighthouse cities, 16 and 17 of May. So if you work in a city, you are interested in this topic, and you would like to learn more about what we are doing in ULaaDS, this is, I am putting in the chat the call. There is a fairly easy application process. Take a look at it, and who knows, you might be able to meet us all in person in May.
Great, thank you, Ariana. Okay, so this being said, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the day and hopefully see you soon.